The following podcast may include coarse language, graphic content, and politically and/or religiously sensitive material. Those of you who are offended by such content should fuck off. Hey there, another podcast, another day, sigh.
Who are you? How did you get into my secret volcano lair?
Telepathy. No, what's the other one? Breaking and entering, that's right.
It couldn't be mental telepathy. It has to have been asshole projection.
Asshole projection?
Yes, with enough asshole projection, you can achieve rocket-powered flight.
You're being rather anal here, I think. Yeah, I hate to crap in your parade here, but... yeah, that's the butts. Okay, we get our...
Well, they say if it happens, it's good luck.
Yeah. Okay, so is that our quota of bad ass jokes?
Well, I think that's just the badass jokes we could come up with for now. Let's see how the conversation develops.
You mean degenerates?
Who knows? We might get really corny.
All right. Oh, yeah, the podcast. All right. Welcome to the Daemoneye podcast. The podcast we discuss tabletop and CRPGs. Apparently, that's a thing now to say CRPG for computer RPGs, so we're saying that from now on. Sci-fi, fantasy, fiction, science, technology, geek culture, and how to raise and breed hounds of Tindalos.
And also, evidently, anal problems. Might want to see a proctologist about that, Tristan.
Okay. I remember, a Tindalos puppy isn't just for a day, for a month. It's forever. Literally, they never die. They're immortal. And they'll devour your essence forever, too. So keep that in mind when you raise them. So, what's going on with you, Tyler?
Well, I just finished my workout and getting some of the prep done for the dinner that I'm making tonight. I got the rice soaking right now.
Well, I didn't work out, but I did make my dinner already, so that's good to go. It's corn chowder, and I made some wheat cookies. That should be fine for the week. It rained a little bit yesterday. Hooray, we needed that here in California. Beyond that, not much is going on with me. I mean, we've been doing great work on the Heroes of Horror, but for me, just been another one of those months. Creatively derelict. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I sent out the new Heroes of Horror a couple of days ago, and I already got some feedback, or playtesting feedback for stuff that was like, dope moments, like, things that I accidentally misnamed because of copy pasta errors and had to fix.
Fair enough. Well, for me, there was no game last on Friday. Usually we run a game, Dragon, usual thing. Because guess what favorite organization returned to Wellman Hall, Tyler?
Oh, you have to be joking.
No, it wasn't the Republicans this time, but close.
I don't know, Campaign Crusade for Christ?
No, not that bad. The Future Farmers of America returned.
Oh, frack me.
The good news is that we actually had advance warning. For the first time in, I think, a decade, we were given an email warning us not to come to Wellman because the FFA were there.
Let me guess, you got it the day of.
The day of, yes. But I didn't actually have to go there, and then he booted out because a bunch of preteens and teenagers in surprisingly fancy uniforms were wandering about Wellman Hall, giving us funny looks for carrying miniatures and game books with dragons and dungeons on them. No, so it was relocated to Steve's Pizza in Davis as usual, but role-playing games don't go well at Steve's, not enough tabletop room, so we just canceled it.
Speaking of role-playing games not going well, let me tell you about Stuart. Yes, I'm calling you out.
Stuart.
He's one of my...
Hold on, is this before we go, is this his actual name?
Some names may have been changed to protect the incredibly annoying.
Okay, bad player stories are always fun.
No, that's just
Go for it.
He's not a bad player. He's a great player. He just has the worst luck. I've seen him roll 3 consecutive natural ones on a D20 using different people's D20s.
Oh, no.
No matter what the die roll is, it's always the worst result. Well, yesterday the party in the 1940s Apocalypse game were on a train tracks going towards Reno in order to pick up a supply of a train full of phosphorus that was supposed to be going to a matchstick factory south of town, so that they could basically hijack it and use it as fertilizer.
Well, it also prevent the workers from getting Fossy Jaw. Look it up; it's horrible.
Well, first encounter that they end up having, which is at night after they stopped the train so they could sleep, it's his turn to roll for the random encounter. He rolls a freak and a freet. So now we have to do a new campaign.
Whoa, you got a TPK?
Not so much TPK as one player was terminally turned into a smear on the ground via jet propulsion, thanks to because that's how a fleet flies, by jet propulsion. And he flew over that player after hitting the player with hold person so that he could not pass his reflex save.
Oh, dear. So, wait, just one player died? That doesn't seem to be the end of a campaign.
And then he stole their train car when they were 8 days away from anything remotely resembling civilization because it had all their loot in it, and that's the entire reason he was on the material plane, was looking for loot. In that train car where they passed out bodies of 2 of the other players.
Oh, dear. Yeah, that's not pleasant. Well, there must be some quantum entanglement with your campaign and the one that one of the other players was running 2 weeks ago. We were investigating, scouting along a barbarian camp in a winter-bound world. We were checking out a stone building, and, well, we failed to miss the pit traps in the snow. One player fell in there, wasn't killed, but damaged. I managed to pull him up, but in the process, we lured the barbarian patrols to our location. So we ran into the stone building. It turned out the stone building was an old mine that happened to lead to the Underdark. So we decided to escape down there to hide. Well, I did. So I have to take some of the blame here. We decided to get a head start on the barbarians by taking a literal minecart. Yes, it was a minecart level, Tyler. An actual minecart. The problem is that because the mine, it's an old mine, the rails were kind of rusted. There were several dexterity checks we had to make to basically steer the minecart so it wouldn't go off the rails. And 3 times between 2 players, every time we failed and we got smashed. Only punctuated by smash, unconscious, smash, death's door, heal. So we managed to get to the bottom and escape them. One of the players, the one I was with, was at like -5 hit points after we used all the healing juice she had, and I was at literally 1 hit point. So we needed time to rest, at least 1 day, so I could help her recover. So I just kind of rest there in the Underdark because above there is the barbarians, below, we don't want to go any deeper with 1 hit point. So first encounter we roll was a drow patrol. Very first encounter. We're seeing in the dark. So I fail my listen check, but the DM decides to give us the mulligan there because it's that or we're pretty much dead. So we roll for initiative, I lose initiative, and the drow rolls a critical attack on me. Then when the other players come down a little while later to chase after me, to chase for the drow, they track down the drow, kill his goblin slaves, but then when the monk and the drow get into a duel, the drow makes 3 consecutive crits on the player. Granted, he was wielding a scimitar, whereas a 19, higher crit chance, but everyone was a crit. All 3 hits were a crit. All right, so beyond the coronavirus scare, quote unquote, there's nothing I want to discuss which may be of interest to you. I recently watched the newest season of Castlevania on Netflix.
Fucking great. That was fucking great.
It was awesome, except for the endings.
Yeah, it kind of petered out at the end. Although I did like the whole "it worked for dead old dad" line.
All right, well, they're basically first of all, spoiler alert for those of you who don't want to be spoiled, and actually maybe you don't. But the 3 endings for the 3 main plots, I did not care for them. The first one involving the Forge Master being seduced. First of all, we all knew that was going to happen. But,
yeah, that was kind of a giveaway.
Yeah, plus, they used magic on him to force it. Kind of hackneyed if you ask me. I get the submission. He had to submit first, but why did he? I get the submission thing a little bit, but it seems kind of forced. They could have been a little more clever with that ending, I think. For one thing, unless they're setting it up for something else in the future, I don't know. The Alucard plot, sexy ending, but it came out of fucking nowhere, man. I'm sorry. I get I get that his two apprentices were kind of a little damaged, but nothing to that extent. Absolutely nothing. There was very little foreshadowing. There was foreshadowing they wanted to do something nice for him, but
I liked the village. I liked the Village of Lindenfell plot with the whole medieval noir thing where there was no good guys. But in all of them, I really get the impression that that we were like missing at like a 10 minutes or so of extra story to set everything up for the end.
Especially the judge's little side business. I mean, there was only the slightest foreshadowing with the way he mentioned how he doesn't like children. But that was it.
Yeah,
and there's no motivation as to why he hated
a little bit extra, like one extra episode right in the middle.
Like, why did he hate that beyond just being a huge advocate of law and order? Why was it specifically children? It was pointlessly evil. I mean, maybe I think that was kind of the point they were trying to push. Humanity can be pointlessly evil, but this was pointlessly evil with a capital P. It did not feel satisfying. It came out of nowhere and not in a good way. So,
like,
good
maybe
story.
if they had had a scene where he's at, like, say, the grave of his child, and they ask him what happened to his child, and his child was running through town and got run over by a cart. So now, like any child he sees running around all happy, it just pisses him off that it can't be his kid.
Exactly. That would make perfect sense. That would work. That would be a character motivation. It would still be evil. So
yeah, that's actually what I think was missing to really set up all three of the plot lines, was a little bit of motivation on the side of the bad guys.
I mean, otherwise it was so well written, and the pacing was almost a little too slow. And despite having three different plot lines, maybe show a scene with Lenore, how despite being one of the four sisters, she's lonely because she always feels left out and has nobody to call her own or nothing to call her own. And that's why she went out and basically got a pet, or made a pet out of the Forge Master, is to finally not feel alone. Yeah, I know. They could have we knew that this was going to happen. There were so many different ways they could have made it spin out of it was so predictable. So, good story, but the endings were, really subpar. We'll see. The last two seasons were kind of fit together into one overall story arc, so maybe they'll make it work in the next season, like in half a year from now or a year from now, but we'll see. So just had to go over that before we went on to the main topic of today's podcast. So anything you want to add to that?
I think we covered that. So I guess we can end spoilers here.
Yeah, end spoilers here, end spoilers there. So business-wise, still Heroes of Horror. Me still dithering on my writing and other projects. I'll get to it eventually. I'm not quite at George R.R. Martin level yet, but I'm getting there, which is something I'm very ashamed about. Okay?
Yeah, I would guesstimate that I'm probably somewhere around a third of the way done with primary writing on Heroes of Horror.
All right, well, that's some good news. At least one of the two of us are being productive. All right.
Well, it's going to be a 500 to 600 page freaking massive tome.
All right. Well, in any event, let's get on to the topic, which is everything you want to know about campaigning, but were afraid to ask. So, campaign design of a role-playing game. This is a big thing. It's kind of like writing a novel, only a lot easier, but also quite a bit harder. Because you're not quite writing a story, but you're not writing a game either. It's what makes role-playing game design kind of unique. The closest analogy you can come to is writing a role-playing game on the computer, only you have to almost account for every possibility. Of course, you can't do that, but so you always have to be able to think on your feet to some extent, but if you don't plan, unless you're very good at just kind of freewheeling it, it's not going to be a very satisfying game. Okay? So, there's an old book from TSR, the guys who used to have D&D before Wizards of the Coast bought them and before Hasbro bought them. They released an old supplement for the AD&D 2nd edition game called the Campaign Sourcebook and Catacomb Guide. If you can get a hold of this, digital or otherwise, I can't recommend it any better. It's one of the oldest and best books for campaign design. A lot of what we'll talk about can be found right in here, but there's more we can add to it, I would say.
Yeah, I used to have a hard copy of it. It was actually fairly useful. It's a good guide for somebody who's like just starting to get into campaigns. But but when you're doing a campaign, your campaign will always go towards the edge cases because players are unpredictable. And since by definition the edge cases are limitless, the guide can't really go into explanations on how to deal with each one. It only briefly touches if the players decide to do X kind of things.
Okay, so campaign design. Before you start a campaign, the book here defines several different styles. Well, actually, almost 10 different styles of campaign. So this is how you approach the game is going to be like. So first of all, and this can apply to most actual settings, which is an entirely different thing. This is more universal, although some settings are probably better suited for certain styles, obviously. So the first style is classic hack and slash. You're killing things, taking their loot, going from dungeon to dungeon, adventure to adventure. It's emphasis on combat and conflict. It's pretty straightforward. It's relatively easy to run too. And it's almost like playing a sort of low budget fantasy RPG on the computer or a video or console game.
I always referred to it as tabletop Diablo.
That's actually a pretty good one. So it's not all just killing things. There's probably some tactics involved, but it really is just kind of killing things, building your character up. It's easy to run, and some players prefer it. If you want to do it, that's fine. Then there's the thinker style game where it's more an investigative or kind of a puzzle-based game. Detective role-playing game or investigator, obvious example, or could
be through mystery kind of stuff.
Or in a fantasy game could simply be one where a lot of the dungeons you go into have more puzzles, more exploration, that sort of thing. So that can be good if the players are into that sort of style, but if they aren't, avoid it. I'd say it has to be a thinker game. You have to have some player participation. If they're just there to do whatever, they're not that interested in it, it's not going to work. It's a hard style of game to run as well because you can put a lot of work into it. So you can't just bullshit yourself way through it. So you have to plan ahead. Don't forget
the town style game.
We'll get to that later, yeah. So next there's the righteous role player style, where it can be any other of these styles. It's almost a subset. It's where there's more emphasis on role playing. You actually develop characters. There's actual player interaction where they really get into the roles. Again, this is one which requires players to be interested in role playing or know how to role play. Sometimes, again, this also requires more forethought because the DM has to put more work into developing NPCs and keeping track of the interactions and the dramas and so forth. And I also think you have to put more emphasis on, say, working in the players' backgrounds into the campaign as well.
Yeah, what I've always found works... Well, shall we go into what I found works best first, or do you want to continue going with different styles of campaigns?
We have a few more. Let's go over them. Let's try and do a brief overview in each one, and I want to give you a chance to give your 2 cents. And at the end, we'll fill in any ones which we feel are missing. So another one, which is again a subset, the historical simulation. Again, this style can be a subset style, but it's when we actually incorporate real-world history, even if it's maybe modified, like say, Heroes of Horror. It can turn to be a more serious game, and it can be either very easy or very hard, depending upon what your historical knowledge is. If you know a lot about the old Wild West and your players do, this can be a very satisfying and fun role-playing game because a lot of the setting, a lot of the work is already done for you. If you want to just create a campaign set in a setting where you don't know well, it takes a lot of research on your part. So it's kind of a high work, high reward campaign.
Sounds about right.
Mm-hmm. There's the silly game where it's just basically a excuse to joke around. Certain games are better suited for this. Certain styles vary, like they're called beer and peanut games, where there's less emphasis on the rules. It's almost like a court game. But silly games can be fun. Some examples of them are like the Poke-Thulu game, where it's like a mixture of Pokemon and Cthulhu. There's a Bunny and Burrows game, although that'd be quite serious. There's Toon, the role-playing game. So there are a lot of... So for a silly game, it can be any setting in any game, but there are some games which almost force you to do it. And if you want to have a silly game, that's fine. It can be a lot easier to run, low maintenance if you're into it. But some people are fine with having it just be silly the entire time. Other times you want to get serious eventually. So
okay, what I've always found works best in terms of setting up a campaign is you have to have a campaign concept. All right, is your campaign in the modern day real world? Is it, say, in some fantasy world with modern day technology? Is it, say, takes place back in 800s Europe? Some concept. And you got to make sure that your players like that concept. If you have a player who doesn't like to mix his doesn't like to mix his gun playing games into his D&D games, he's not going to get into it. So that takes a bit of cooperation, kicking the ball back and forth until finally everybody settles on one game that they all agree to, or one campaign idea that they all agree on, and that you as the DM feel comfortable setting up and running. Then once you have the campaign idea, you set out the rules for character creation, starting level, races, all that kind of stuff. And then you set the inciting incident. Like, for instance, let's say it's a game that takes place in the late 1940s in, say, Albuquerque, like the game that we were running. And the inciting incident is the Nazis got the bomb, and, well, they exercised it with the usual Nazi vigor, and now the world is a radioactive hellhole. On the upside, the Nazis were defeated. On the downside, it was by mass suicide.
Mutually assured destruction. Who was the scientist who coined that phrase again? I think it was von Neumann who did that, who actually pushed for that.
I can't remember.
I think it was.
But anyways, that's the overall inciting incident. Underneath that, you have your inciting incidents for individual adventures. But that's like what happened to create the need for adventurers. Then each adventurer makes their character, gives it to you as the DM, and you have to come up with 3 things for each character as the DM. Number 1, you have to come up with why the freak they are in the adventure or they are in the campaign. Like if they make a character who's basically like a old style investigative cop, maybe he works for the local police department. If you have a character who's a physician, like, let's say the party cleric / healer, maybe they actually are emergency, or maybe they actually work out of the emergency room at the hospital. Okay. Once you have how they work into the campaign, you also have to have what their goal is, not what the goal is in the campaign, but how the campaign is pushing back against them. Maybe that cop had accidentally long ago sent the wrong man to the chair for a murder, and now the serial killer that guy got blamed for is hunting down that cop in order to get revenge for the cop letting somebody else take credit for his name.
Okay.
Now that's something that the players don't know. Another thing the player, or at least probably don't know at the beginning, that gives you a wide range of adventure hooks, which is one of the reasons you're doing it. The final thing that you need to come up with is what happens if that player is no longer, or if that character is no longer in the campaign. Let's face it, characters die. It happens. Or players get tired of running a character and decide to retire it and start up a new one. That happens as well. So, in order to keep the game consistent and the players involved in it, you have to figure out what happens if that guy dies. Like, let's say if that cop dies, maybe the serial killer that was his unknown nemesis starts like a small murder cult, and then the players, with the new character, have to deal with the murder cult.
Okay. What you're kind of describing is what was the scenario. So we had the style and then the scenario. So, and that's one definite scenario, and your scenario setup is one definite one you can go over. The kind of combination of overarching plot and also kind of a monster of the day approach. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. the interactions of all the different players' backstories and their hidden involvements in the campaign will end up kind of creating each adventure as it goes on. Let's say the healer. The healer manages to save a bunch of people after a major car pileup. What the healer doesn't know is that he accidentally also saved that damn serial killer that's making the policeman's life miserable.
All right. So let's briefly go back to styles of play here, though. I want to mention a few styles which should be avoided at all costs during most games. Okay,
Monty
so kind of
Hall.
backtracking. That was literally my first one. A Monty Hall, of course, refers to the game show where contestants would basically win a bunch of shits. And the idea is that there's low risk, high reward. You basically, players do stuff and they get a lot of magical items, a lot of experience. They quickly level up, become all powerful. It's kind of, I would also call this the Rick and Morty effect. Rick gets impressively more powerful over the brief series, and now it's harder and harder to write adventures for him. I'm not sure if that's a self-imposed challenge posed by the writers or a problem and a corner to back up into, but once you're at that level, it's very hard to continue and sustain that sort of campaign. That's why Monty Hall's be avoided. There needs to be a good risk-to-reward ratio if you're doing such a thing. Okay?
What I found to be a good balance is that characters... What I found to be a good balance. Of course, it may vary. You might have a session where there's like practically nothing happening, and you might have a session where it's like nothing but dragon attacks. Mm-hmm. But in general, a character should only level up after a number of sessions equal to their current level. So a first level character, it's okay if they level up after one session. First level is the training level anyway. It's the level where you're finding out what the hell the character's supposed to be doing. But to get to level 3, he should go through 2 more sessions. To get to level 4, he should go through 3 more sessions, so on and so forth.
That's a good rule of thumb for level-based role-playing games like D&D, D&D 20. For other systems, it's a little hard to gauge that, of course, but it's the general idea is you have to pace it. There should not be... A good rule of thumb is that unless you're starting at a very low level, there should not be a significant difference in power between each campaign or each session. If in one session players are suddenly able to raise mountains, maybe, and they couldn't in the previous one, maybe you're Monty Halling it a bit, okay? Also watch material wealth in this setting, in any game. Too much of that, players are very creative. They can throw money at the problem. That should be avoided.
Yeah. If you end up giving players, let's say they come across a monster horde, and you end up giving them thousands of gold coins, keep in mind that money is only valuable because of its rarity. So for every gold coin, for every dollar bill, they should also be getting 100 pennies. Mm-hmm. Which means only one out of every 100 coin drops would be gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, Monty Hall problem is that once you start one, it's hard to go back. The players will generally complain and not like the sudden paucity of riches and rewards. Okay, and even if you try to take money away from them afterwards, they will. Even if you do things like very creatively, they will notice this and they will not like it. So again, it's the whole prevention is worth a pound of cure thing. All right. Another style to avoid is called the novel style of play or the plot railroad. The GM writes a story, writes the whole thing from beginning to end, beginning, middle, climax, Daemoneye, and runs the players through it. Yeah, that's not going to work in most scenarios.
Yeah, the GM should be refereeing the game, not basically playing all sides, including the players. Otherwise, why have players?
Yeah, the GM can just tell them what happens, which is one reason why diceless role-playing games generally don't work well, because it can devolve into that very quickly and very easily if the GM is trying to push a story. Okay? Another one to avoid is kind of the wargaming. Although it can work if you want to play more of a military-style campaign, but if you focus too much on the minutia of combat, that's a little different from hack and slash in that you start to focus on every little detail of combat, every little scenario. You try to emphasize combat too much. That can create problems in most cases, unless the players are really into that sort of thing. If you want to do that, otherwise, just buy a board game or play Warhammer or some other miniature war game. Role-playing is supposed to be flexible. That's where it evolved. It evolved from wargaming.
Yeah, and evolved from wargaming because people wanted a more personal and intricate player-developed experience rather than just, okay, I lost 3 of my elven archers in this skirmish.
Yeah. All right. One more style of play I want to mention. This is not one to be avoided, but it's a tricky one. It's kind of a blend between thinker and role-playing, a political style game, where it's kind of both puzzles and also heavy role-playing, where there's a lot less emphasis on combat. This is a very hard one to run because it requires a lot of preparation on the GM's part and willing participation of the players. You have to. It also, unfortunately, almost requires you to write a story or at least a very detailed scenario and work around it. It can be very satisfying and fun to run if you can do it. But a real political game is very hard to run.
Yeah, I've found that political style games usually work if you have the players take on political roles in the local government. And you make sure that one of the players is the guy in charge of the local government. Because if the players are just taking orders all the time, they're not going to feel like they're in charge of their own destiny. Which usually means, at least at the beginning, starting with a small, like maybe the players run a hamlet, and then as they're more successful in the development of the hamlet, the local king decides to promote them to a small village, and then over the years it grows and grows and grows, and basically as they level up, or as their characters become more powerful, they get moved to different areas that are having problems because, hey, they're the problem solvers.
Or punishment by promotion if they mess up.
Yeah.
All right, those are all the styles of campaigns that the Catacomb Guide suggests, and I think it's pretty encompassing. Is there anything you want to add to that? Remember, these are styles, not scenarios for the campaign.
Yeah, one that seems to have been left out is the Tourist Bureau campaign.
Tourist Bureau?
Yeah, it's the campaign idea is that in your campaign world you have areas that are really famous for one reason or another, and in the campaign, or the players play the campaign as going from one famous area to another famous area to another famous area to see the sights, or to experience the dungeon or whatever, or to fight the big dragon of Mount Doom.
All right. That kind of overlaps with scenario, but I see what you mean. So you already mentioned one scenario you have there, which is kind of a combination of the Monster of the Week and Heroic Quest, where there's an overarching plot, but there's also a lot of intermediaries between it. So one scenario, again, is a Heroic Quest. These tend to be shorter campaigns, but the idea is you have a goal, fend off the invading mongrel horde, rescue the princess, find the
defeat the army of evil dragons,
find the Misty MacGuffin, etc., etc. That's a heroic quest where there's a clear goal in mind. And this tends to be a little shorter because once you achieve the goal, where do you go from there? I mean, you can stretch it out for a new quest over and over again. But the advantage of this is that as long as the players are willing to play along, you present clear motivation, a clear direction. So it's good for shorter games, but for longer campaigns, it doesn't usually work. And sometimes players will resent not being able to have full autonomy and full choice in the campaign setting. So, of course, like you say, we should probably pause here and say one of the things you got to do, and you already mentioned this, Tyler, is to clear the campaign setting and the scenario with the players before you run it.
Oh, yeah,
you got to do that. I mean, to some extent, you can keep certain things secret because there is something to be said for surprising your players with a scenario or setting. Like maybe you secretly decide to pull a Matrix and have the players play in, say, a fantasy setting. Oh, but it turns out they're all hooked up into a MMORPG that went wild. The surprise won't have the same impact.
Yeah, but that's something that would be developed further down the line.
Mm-hmm,
as far as the actual players are concerned, they're playing the game that they wanted to play. Mm-hmm. Getting into the nitty-gritty understructure of it, so it's a Matrix, okay. It could the entire world could just as easily be the dream of a dying god.
Mm-hmm.
For the actual players, or for their experience, there's no difference.
Not everything, but you have to make sure that you'll accommodate them. You also have to know your players, your player types. And also, but more on that later. Next, Monster of the Week or the sitcom. There's no overall goal per se. Maybe there's an arc later on, but it's a day-to-day thing. It often happens when you're in a set location or a set region. The players may move around, maybe stay in some area, but they're more a reactionary force here. Okay, this is actually not a bad choice when you have a bunch of players who are more passive. And I've had players before who are kind of passive. They have a hard time developing what their players want to do or what their PC goals are. So for that, you can create a situation to push against them, and they have to push back. The downside is that, of course, it can get, it requires a little bit of work because you have to write a new adventure every time. You have to, and over a while, it seems to get a little monotonous.
Yeah, I was gonna say over time it does get boring for both the players and the DM.
Mm-hmm. It can work though. Another scenario is the one we already mentioned, the builder or ruler, which is a little bit like Monster of the Week, but the idea is that you're not just sitting there or you're not just writing something, you are building something.
It's less Monster of the Week and more Problem of the Week. Like maybe there is a monsoon coming in that slows or stops your progression towards building that wall you desperately need to stop the monster hordes from hitting you during the summer.
Well, the difference is that builder, you have a end goal to get, or at least a direction to go for. In a Monster of the Week, you might just be defending the village, or you might just be in a region trying to keep something going, or you're just adventurers wandering around trying to make ends meet, or the builder you're trying to develop a guild, you're trying to develop a town, you're trying to build something. Okay, and the players can also have goals like to be. Like maybe the fighter is in charge, build a great army. Maybe the mage wants to build a tower there and build a great mage college, et cetera, et cetera. So there's more end goals there. And you can even work in a plot there as well. It's a great campaign setting. We've used it a lot in the great campaign scenario. It works well. It lets players have a lot of agency, yet connect that to responsibility. And a lot of players are very responsive to this system.
Yeah, or say the Great Quest style campaign, it's sort of Monster of the Week, but it's more like a wandering investigation. Like, let's say you have a god king that's conquered the world and he rules it with an evil tyrannical fist, and the only way to stop him was the magic hoop de loo. Well, you have to find the magic hoop de loo, and that's the ongoing quest of the game.
Okay, and then finally there's one you already mentioned, kind of the tourist one. Again, it's kind of a style and a scenario with the wandering vagrants. It's almost like a heroic journey style where you're going from place to place, kind of making ends meet, righting wrongs or just making money, et cetera, et cetera. The players have a great amount of agency in this. It's basically the GM's responsibility to respond to where they go. They hear about something, they go there, the GM just, develops something they can do there. Then they say, let's go here. There's something they want to move on the desert, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of the opposite of the builder campaign where maybe you might have like a merchant caravan or something, or I don't know. Maybe your mercenaries in a modern day setting is kind of like a pulp thing where you venture from hidden temples to Nazi strongholds. The point is it is kind of like Monster of the Week, but the players have more agency. The GM is more of a responsive element, so it's the opposite there.
Yeah, in which case the players should present like an overarching character goal for their character. Like, let's say you're, for your example, a mercenary. Well, his overarching character goal might be to get enough savings together that he can just flat out retire and live the rest of his days in peace. Mm-hmm. Or you might have a wizard in the same party whose character goal is to get all of the meet all the qualifications he needs to in order to get into the secret academy of the Veil of Twilight or something.
Mm-hmm. So we'll get more into getting the PCs involved a little later on, but I want to discuss another thing, which is kind of how to start a campaign, because how you start a campaign is critically important. It kind of can set the tone for the rest of the campaign, and it's how you hook the players. And it's also, how do you force or how do you naturally present these group of players? Sometimes the PCs they develop are quite different. How did this start? Why are they in for this? The lazy way of doing that is the 4 adventurers meet in the bar scenario, where you just say, okay, you guys meet in a bar, decide to adventure together, or you meet at a cantina, you decide to start explore the galaxy together, etc. It's quick, it's dirty, it's easy. And if the players are commenting for this, that's fine, but...
Well, actually, there's a stage before that you haven't taken into account. You have to decide, or there's 3 different types of adventurers. Mm-hmm. There's the thrill seeker, which is somebody who grew up going, I want to be an adventurer. I want to go into dungeons and kill dragons and find princesses. And now that they're all grown up, that's what they do with their life. Mm-hmm. There's also the common man in a bad situation, like say a barkeep when the town gets overrun by hobgoblins who is defending it, who in the process of defending his property ends up killing the chief hobgoblin's son, and now there's now he has a bounty on his head, and he has to leave his hometown before otherwise, the hobgoblin army is going to come and kill the hometown to find him. So he's just a normal guy who's been put in a shit situation. And the third one is adventure as punishment. Somebody who, let's say, a thief ends up robbing a treasury, but gets caught after spending the goods, and now he's bound by a gaze to go out and complete a quest to make up for it as a kind of punishment fitting the crime.
You mentioned a few ways to kind of establish motivation for the players and the PCs, but think more about the players. How do they want to play? Because each player comes into a role-playing game expecting different things. Some might just see it as like a Diablo simulator. Others might want to get deep in their characters. Others are just there to have fun. They might just want to screw around to some extent. Okay, so how do you get them, each of these disparate personality types, into the game? Okay, well, the first one is big one. Do you want the PCs to establish a strong background or not? Because there's kind of advantage to that and some disadvantages.
Well, you want them to have a background, even if they're just there to be power gamers, because then you can use that background to get them involved into adventuring hooks.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So you definitely want some background. Another question is, do you want to incorporate that background into the story more? Do you want to have it turn out that the major antagonist be the father of the PC, Darth Vader style? Oh, is that technically a spoiler alert? No, not this stage.
Well, that goes into what I said about the second thing you got to do with each of the players, is you have to have how the campaign world is unknowingly interacting with them. Mm-hmm. For instance, Star Wars would be a great example. Luke is a good example of a normal guy who just ended up in a shit situation and had to start adventuring. He's just a normal farm boy who one day happens to pick up the wrong damn droid, and his family gets murdered as a result, and now he's trapped on this quest out of a mixture of obligation and a desire for vengeance.
But he's also very much destined, though, at the same time.
Well, that's where the background, how the campaign is interacting with that character, comes into play. Unknown to Luke Skywalker, he's secretly the son of the big bad Darth Vader, who is destined to set the Force back in balance. Okay, that can definitely work. So you can take these little things and build on them. And the players are at least a little bit into role playing. They'll generally be down with it. Other times, though, you'll have players who aren't that interested in building that background. They'll just go, "Yeah, my daddy was killed by orcs, and he wants to kill other orcs." Or they'll just say, I became an adventurer because he wants to be rich and have a lot of lands. And they don't want to, or they really can't go further into it. They just want there to play a hack and slash game. So the question is, do you want to kind of push them into that if you're interested in that as well, or do you want to just lay off? No, you lay off.
Yeah.
You don't want to push them into it. But just because you can't, or just because you don't push them into it, doesn't mean that the other players can't get involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, let's say you have a guy who just did a generic background. Yeah, my dad was killed by orcs, and now I hate orcs. Let's go out and kill some orcs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, what if one of the other players is a half-orc? Or what if one of the other players is trying to find, like, you know, the swordsmith that can forge a sword powerful enough to kill the demon king of his massively intricate background, and it turns out said swordsmith happens to be an orc. Just because that one character isn't into role-playing his backstory doesn't mean that other characters' backstories can't interact with his.
Yeah, exactly. The point is that you can generally find a majority of players who want a certain style and a certain scenario, but you'll always have a few who aren't, one or two is not into role-playing, or one is really into role-playing, but the rest are just there for the beer and pretzel side of it. So,
a really good resource for this kind of thing is actually TV tropes. Go to TV tropes. I think it's at tvtropes.com. And you can find like all different kinds of ways to just mess around with your characters because of their backstories and how, or in the world of the campaign's inciting incident.
You just got to remember not to use the background against them. That's a classic killer GM trope. You want to be able to incorporate them.
Yeah, unless the background is something specifically that the character, that's designed to be antagonistic to the character, like the character is trying to run away from a murder sentence. Unless it's something like that, you'd never use the background against the character. The background should always be used to add to the campaign or add to the adventure.
The exception being when there's a system where players can choose to have a certain background, like in GURPS and in the Legend of Five Rings and a whole bunch of role-playing games, there are actually advantages you can buy which incorporate that as a penalty in the game, having a bad background that results in a reputation or having an enemy built in. So that can actually be a very useful tool when the actual system lets the players kind of balance their character with the advantages and disadvantages of in a background. If you don't, like in like D&D where there's no actual point system or advantage or disadvantage for a background or very limited ones, you got to be careful because you can't have a player say, "Oh, I'm a prince, so that's my background, so that means I can do whatever I want in this setting, or I've got $1,000 GP a week allowance." Yeah.
No, there should be some you cannot get a bonus without a corresponding cost. If a character is a prince, he has to have sacrificed something to be a prince. Like, let's say, like for instance, in Heroes of Horror, there's a royal blood feat. Taking the feat makes you like, you know, a little minor earl or something like that. And you get some social bonuses inside your kingdom and some social penalties in enemy kingdoms. But you have the option of taking royal blood for the throne, being like actually in the line of succession. That gives you even more social bonuses and penalties, but it comes at a cost of an ability score penalty because of inbreeding.
Yeah. Again, if there is a set of rules in play in the system for this, great. If there's not, and the player wants to establish background, it becomes trickier. They want to have the background give them advantages and or disadvantages. You try to balance it, but be careful and try to err on the side of caution, or just, you know, if there's no actual set of rules for positive or negatives when they establish a character background. That's what I'm getting at here.
Yeah. But something like being a prince, or, you know, could also be used as, say, the inciting incident. Like, let's say one of the player characters is a prince, and you just flat out give it to him. Okay, you're a prince. But the inciting incident for the campaign is that your kingdom has been conquered, and now all the members of the royal family are being hunted so that nobody can reclaim the throne.
Yeah. And then there's another little minor issue which comes into when you have a player players who are deep, which have very deep backgrounds in the story, and that's a problem with player no-shows.
Oh, yeah.
When you have a heavy plot, and a certain player can't come that week, or they can't come in the next 3 weeks, but it's their player who was the prince, or it's their player who was bound to the artifact, or it's that player who was the head scientist who was leading the investigating team to develop a cure to the pandemic.
Yeah, I've had so many campaigns just suddenly end because of a player's change in class schedules or job schedules or something, and now they can't make the same game or the same game night as the other players.
That's the downside of having a rather plot-heavy setting. Having a heroic quest or a political or. Yeah, that's the one advantage that the more hack and slash or easygoing games have. It can incorporate a rotating character class. You can work around it though. Like if you're playing a political game, you can incorporate the player's appearance as he suddenly died. The PC is ready with it. Is okay with that. So there are ways around it, but it's something you always have to keep in mind when writing or developing a campaign where the players have a background or incorporating the story. Players could suddenly die.
Or what I try to do if an important player can't make it for a given game session, is I try to do like a side quest thing. Like maybe they put the attack on the castle on hold because because they need a supply of weapons that they don't have, and now there's a side quest that the other players go into to go get those weapons. Meanwhile, the player who couldn't show stays back with the camp with all of their mercenaries to maintain morale and keep anybody from wandering off.
And there's always the option, weak as it is, to have the GM play the character or have another character play the character for just 1 or 2 sessions if it'll be temporary. It can work. And for more inspiration on how to deal with sudden character disappearances / deaths, see Game of Thrones.
Or at least the first couple of seasons.
Or the books, too.
Yeah, the books were a lot better.
Yeah. So we kind of went over a lot of this, but let's go back to starting the campaign. We already mentioned the 4 adventurers meet in a bar, standard one. They just show up, they adventure, good for hack and slash, Monty Hall style campaigns, fair enough. Or even maybe another one which isn't used as often, but I think is valid enough, and also adds a little nice tension kind of justification of even. It's a way of justifying very disparate character types being forced together. The Elder Scrolls method. They're all in prison.
I was just thinking that.
The Elder Scrolls method. The PCs, the players, are in prison for some reason. Maybe they're political prisoners. Maybe they were captured, whatever. And this explains why characters of different backgrounds are forced to, and different styles are forced together. And then there's some escape, and they have to work together to get out, and we can go from there. It's a good way to start a campaign. And if the players are willing to play ball, can also kind of establish a good dynamic as they escape. But, yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's also the forced patron method.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you have a noble who needs a particular job done. Like say their daughter who has an arranged marriage has been kidnapped by a tribe of Gnolls. And he needs his daughter rescued. He can't go to his guardsmen to have them do it, because then word will inevitably leak from the guardsmen to the person with the arranged marriage, and that could endanger the arranged marriage. So what he does is he gets together a group of complete strangers, and either through a method of bribery bribery, intimidation, and threats, gets them to go and rescue his daughter.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like an advanced version of 4 adventurers meet in the bar, only they are summoned together for a task, and where they go from there, it's up to you, because you have to incorporate the start into the overall plot. So maybe they're betrayed by the noble after that, and they have to work together to get out of this, or maybe the lazy version, they like working together and they decide, hey, we worked well here, let's go on from there. I mean, that was actually kind of how the TV series Leverage worked. There was that one adventure, they were all hired together and they liked working together, so they stuck to it.
Or maybe they find out after they rescue the princess that the person that the princess is doing an arranged marriage with is a fiend that wants to that the father is sacrificing her to for power, and now they feel responsible for basically getting this innocent girl murdered, and they have to go and rescue her, and then take her to her uncle's place in a couple of towns over to escape her noble father, who still just thinks of her as a means of attaining power by selling her to infernal forces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Another one which takes inspiration from from other media sources, but I think can be applied in role-playing games with a little bit of work pretty well. In media res. You start the campaign in the middle of a combat or in the middle of a chase. You start right off with the action. It requires you to work with the players a little bit to establish what you're doing, but you jump right into it and go from there. You have the players establish their backgrounds. They put a little more work into it, describe what they did together, and then just you're into it. You go right, you hit the ground running, and then go from there.
Actually, what I found that there's a good way to do that kind of in media res thing is to have everybody make their characters at 2 levels. Like, just have them make their Barney basic beginning characters, and then have them make their actual characters. Mm-hmm. And you do the in media res start of it. And then what happens is if one player can't show up, instead of doing the original campaign where everybody's started off at level 5, you have them pull out their level 1 characters and do some stuff on their level 1 characters with any benefits they get at level 1, then being inherited by their higher level characters. Ooh. Like, let's say they end up earning a favor from a tavern owner. Well, now all their higher level characters can cash in that favor.
Ooh, non-linear role playing, very creative, very creative. See, so that's one way, and another way, which is again a little lazier but can kind of work, is the family matters setting. The players are all related to each other. Brothers, sisters, probably want to avoid mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, but cousins, brothers, maybe uncles. There we go. They are related somehow, and they are all involved in some family matter plot. They're a merchant house. They're a trading company, and there you go.
If you have players of multiple different races that wouldn't usually be in a family situation, like say half orcs and elves, well, you're not going to be able to have a daughter or have them related to one another coming out of the same father. But what you could do is you could have them not related by blood, but related by relationship. Like, let's say that elf and his family run an orphanage in a border town, and all the players grew up in their orphanage.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and because they are. Again, if the players are willing to play ball with this, that can work. If the players aren't willing to do that, again, you go back to the 4 adventurers in a bar situation or the prison methods. Those are both good ways of getting players who don't quite want to or don't know how to establish a background. Because sometimes I've seen this, players actually kind of go, I don't know, man. They don't have any ideas, or they feel embarrassed to do so. It's weird, but it happens more often than you think.
Then that's their background. They are the mystery man, the mysterious stranger who walks into a town that's being attacked by bandits. They have a gun and a will to use it for a little bit of coin.
The players who have trouble with that often have trouble with the silent stranger thing too, unfortunately. So it can work, but not always. All right. Any other ways of creatively starting a campaign you can think of?
Oh, myriad ways of creatively starting a campaign I can think of.
In general, broad terms and classifications.
Yeah. The stranger out of time method.
Okay.
You make You make characters for, say, let's go with Heroes of Horror, just because it's always on my brain because I'm writing it right now.
Fair enough.
You make characters from the pulp 1920s. The era of the Lovecraftian mythos. And then for some reason, they don't know why, they wake up and they're all they're complete strangers, but they're in the middle of a small forested glade next to a medieval town.
Strangers out of time. You are stuck. It's a bit like the prison scenario, only the other side of the coin. You have absolute freedom, but where do you go from here?
And and everybody has the same goal: get the fuck out of there. Go back to their own time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that right there would give them the unifying bond necessary to actually form an adventuring party. After all, they're the only people they can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's one here. Let's go back a little bit. There's one other campaign style I've neglected to mention, which is the heroic journey. You have an end and a beginning. It's related to the wandering vagrants, only there's a direction. You're going from point A to point B. It's a bit like heroic quest, only the difference is the goal is just to get somewhere. So it's kind of a hybrid between wandering vagrant and heroic quest. Just wanted to mention that before we moved on for completeness sake.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we're done.
One more thing, which is an oddball one. I want to mention this because it's not something that's brought up much. In role-playing games, it's cooperative. It's not antagonistic. The players generally don't fight other players. What if you were to run a campaign setting where the players aren't necessarily on the same side? You don't see this a lot in a lot of games, but it does come up, and not just character bickering and infighting. This character stole the +2 dagger that the other player wanted, and then so they start fighting. But can there be a game where the players, even if they're not necessarily antagonistic, they're not necessarily cooperative, they have divergent goals, and they may work against each other in subtle or obvious ways? And can that be incorporated successfully into a game, to turn it into a cooperative to a semi-cooperative game?
Yeah, it can be. What you need to do is you need to make it fall into their motivations. For instance, let's use defeating the big bad. Let's say you have one character who's the son of the big bad, and they want to quote unquote defeat the big bad by reforming them. Meanwhile, you have another character whose parents were killed by the big bad, and they want to quote unquote defeat the big bad by off with his head. But they both have the same eventual goal of stopping the big bad. So up until they get to that moment, that decisive point where the big bad either flips or either stops being the big bad or doesn't, they can walk side by side and argue all the time, and even do stuff that would be counterproductive to the other person's desired outcome. But they both still want the same thing. They want the big bad to not be there.
Yeah, it can be done, but it has to be managed carefully and the players involved have to employ some level of maturity and not really get overly competitive. And if it's causing too much strife, it might be something best being avoided. One campaign style that is very well suited for this idea of not exactly 100% cooperative play is the political style of campaign, where there can be backstabbing to some extent between players. But again, the saying as a whole has to be carefully managed, and you have to have flexible players and flexible GMs and mature players, mature GMs. So it can work, but you have to know what you're getting into, and the players have to also understand what they're getting into. And if the players can't handle that, it might be better just to stick with pure cooperative play.
Yeah, I agree there.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're done.
All right, we could probably talk for several sessions about some details in each of the parts we mentioned here, but I think this is a good place to stop. So, this has been the Daemoneye Podcast, episode 18. Everything you want to know about campaigning, but we're afraid to ask. I'm Tristan Eifler.
I'm that thing in the closet that keeps on giving off a weird smell.
Yes, and we shall